The ink wasn't even dry before the HOA president smirked, thinking he'd won. What he didn't know, he'd just find a Supreme Court judge. And I don't lose. William Grant leaned against his porch railing, the crisp notice still in his hand. Behind him, his backyard glowed in the golden afternoon sun. Immaculate hedges, a perfectly trimmed lawn, and a flower bed bursting with the vibrant roses his late wife had loved. This wasn't just a find. It was a fight he never should have picked. The notice was a blunt instrument of bureaucracy, citing obscure yard maintenance infractions that supposedly violated community standards. As I read the words, a slow, steady anger built up inside me. For over 3 decades, I had dedicated my life to upholding justice in the highest courts of our nation. I had spent years interpreting laws, setting precedents, and ensuring fairness at the very pinnacle of our legal system. And now, a petty board of suburban officials thought they could trample on my rights simply because my lawn didn't conform to their narrow, colorless vision of perfection. I remember the day when I first moved into this home, my sanctuary in a quiet suburb, when I vowed that my garden would be a tribute to freedom, to life, and to the memory of my beloved wife. Every rose, every carefully pruned shrub, every inch of that yard had been a labor of love. And now, this find, as insignificant as it might seem to some, was a personal affront, a challenge thrown down by those who believed that order meant uniformity and that individuality was a crime. As I stood there, the warm glow of the setting sun casting long shadows on my lawn, I knew that it was time to fight back. I would not allow bureaucrats with clipboards and petty rules to dictate how I cared for my home, how I honored my family's legacy. This was a matter of principle, a matter of standing up for the rights of every homeowner who dared to express themselves in their own way. And so, with that find clutched in my hand, I silently vowed that the HOA president and his cronies would soon learn that when you mess with a Supreme Court judge, you get more than just a slap on the wrist. Crescent Park Estates was a model of suburban uniformity, a pristine, gated community where every house looked as if it were plucked from a catalog. Every lawn was trimmed to perfection, every flower bed manicured with exacting precision, and every homeowner was expected to abide by an extensive set of rules laid down by the local homeowners association, HOA. For decades, the HOA had prided itself on maintaining the community's image of order and civility. To many residents, this had meant security and predictability. But to those of us who cherished individuality, it sometimes felt like a straitjacket. At the helm of this rigid structure was Howard Simmons, the HOA president, a man in his late 50s with a penchant for immaculate ties and an ever-present clipboard. Howard was known for his stern demeanor and unwavering dedication to the rules. In his eyes, every infraction, no matter how trivial, was a potential stain on the community's reputation. He had built his reputation on issuing fines and reminders, believing that his strict enforcement kept Crescent Park Estates the envy of the county. Then there was me, William Grant. I wasn't a typical resident. I was a Supreme Court judge, a man accustomed to the highest levels of legal scrutiny and a defender of civil liberties. My home was my retreat, a place where I could reflect on years of legal battles and victories. It was also a tribute to the life I had built and the memories of my late wife, whose passion for life was reflected in every vibrant bloom of our garden. I cherished the freedom to design my yard as I saw fit, allowing nature and personal expression to flourish in defiance of cookie-cutter conformity. My property, nestled on the quieter edge of Crescent Park Estates, was a blend of classic elegance and untamed beauty. The expansive front lawn was carefully designed, featuring winding stone paths, ornamental shrubs, and a spectacular rose garden that paid homage to my wife's favorite blooms. It wasn't perfect by the strictest HOA standards, but it was a living, breathing canvas that told the story of my life, one of passion, resilience, and a deep love for the natural world. Over the years, I had clashed with the HOA on several occasions. Fines had been levied for minor deviations, a tree trimmed a bit too freely, a decorative element that wasn't exactly by the book. I had always argued that art and nature were inherently unpredictable and that true beauty lay in imperfection. But nothing could have prepared me for the shock of receiving that yard fine. To Howard Simmons, the fine was justified. To me, it was a symbol of the petty tyranny that often accompanied bureaucratic overreach. As I reviewed the notice, I recalled countless hours spent tending to my garden, hours filled with the sweet memories of my wife's laughter and the whispered secrets of the wind through the trees. Every inch of that yard was sacred, a testament to our love and my unwavering commitment to live life on my own terms. And now, a fine for unauthorized yard modifications was not only an affront to my autonomy, but a challenge that demanded a response. In Crescent Park Estates, where conformity was the norm, I had always been the outlier, the man who dared to let his yard speak for itself. And as I stood there with the fine in hand, I knew that this was more than just a financial penalty. It was a gauntlet thrown down by those who would rather suppress individuality than celebrate it. The stage was set for a confrontation that would echo far beyond the manicured lawns of our gated community. The day the fine arrived was a turning point. I had received it in a crisp envelope, its contents detailed in language so bureaucratic it might as well have been written in legalese. The charge was simple: unauthorized yard modifications. The fine was steep, $5,000, and it came with a stern warning that any future deviations would be met with harsher penalties. To Howard Simmons and the rest of the HOA board, this was a necessary measure to preserve the aesthetic integrity of Crescent Park Estates. But to me, it was a clear declaration that the board had overstepped its bounds, targeting my property as a symbol of rebellious individuality. I immediately set to work documenting every detail of my yard: the winding stone paths, the riotous bursts of color in my rose garden, the uniquely pruned trees, and the natural imperfections that made it my own. I gathered photos, video footage, and even expert opinions from landscape architects who argued that art and nature were meant to be free. I compiled my digital dossier meticulously, knowing that if I were to challenge the fine, I needed every piece of evidence in my favor. In the days that followed, I began receiving messages from sympathetic neighbors. Some had long harbored frustrations about the HOA's draconian rules. Others admired my defiance and the beauty of my yard. The digital community in Crescent Park Estates was growing restless, a collective chorus of voices demanding that individual creativity not be stifled by arbitrary fines. Hashtags like #YardFreedom and #ArtInNature began to appear on local social media, and my story quickly became a symbol of resistance. I attempted to reason with the HOA board through a formal letter, citing legal precedents and the inherent right to use one's property as a personal canvas. I argued passionately that my yard was not a public spectacle, but a private expression of life's unpredictable beauty. But the board's response was curt and dismissive, a final reminder that my yard must conform to the prescribed standards or face further penalties. Fueled by a sense of injustice and determined to send a message, I decided that if the board wanted order, they'd get my version of it. I began planning my counteraction, something bold, something that would force the HOA and Howard Simmons to recognize that their petty fine was a mistake. And then an idea struck me. I would turn the tables in the most dramatic way possible. Instead of trying to conform, I would amplify my individuality. I decided that I was going to buy the grocery store where the board's cronies shopped, ensuring that I could influence the very fabric of our community's commerce. But even that wasn't enough. I needed a statement that would reverberate through every manicured corner of Crescent Park Estates. I envisioned a monumental project, one that would be impossible for the board to ignore. I decided that I would host an open house on my property, inviting the entire community to experience the true beauty of individuality. I planned live demonstrations of organic gardening, art installations inspired by nature, and even a musical performance that celebrated diversity. I would use my digital dossier to broadcast the event live, ensuring that every resident saw firsthand the contrast between my creative freedom and the oppressive, uniform world that the HOA tried to impose. As the planning intensified, I began to notice that even some board members were questioning Karen's relentless enforcement tactics. Private conversations among residents revealed that many felt that the HOA had lost sight of its original mission, protecting property values and ensuring safety, not stifling creative expression. My evidence and my rallying cry had begun to unite the community in a way that I had never seen before. The pressure was building, and it was clear that the showdown was inevitable. The digital dossier, now bolstered by thousands of supportive messages and a growing petition demanding the repeal of the fine, became a symbol of resistance, a beacon for every resident who believed in the sanctity of personal property and the right to express oneself without fear of bureaucratic retribution. I knew that when the final public hearing came, the combined force of digital evidence and community outcry would force the HOA board to either concede defeat or double down on a losing proposition. My resolve was firm. I would not let a petty fine crush my spirit or silence my creativity. The battle for my yard was now a battle for the soul of Crescent Park Estates, a fight that would determine whether our community would continue to be defined by conformity or be allowed to celebrate the vibrant tapestry of individual expression. As the controversy over my yard fine spiraled through Crescent Park Estates, the digital landscape erupted with support and outrage. Social media platforms buzzed with posts, hashtags, and viral videos showcasing my yard in all its untamed beauty, juxtaposed against the drab, identical lawns that the HOA so cherished. The hashtag yard freedom quickly took off, with hundreds of residents sharing their own stories of fines and arbitrary restrictions and demanding that the HOA board reevaluate its outdated policies. Local news stations arrived on the scene, their cameras capturing sweeping views of my property, a riot of colors, textures, and natural imperfections that defied the uniformity demanded by the HOA. "This is what real beauty looks like," one reporter declared on air, his voice a mix of admiration and incredulity. Interviews with supportive neighbors revealed a growing undercurrent of dissent. Many confessed that they, too, felt stifled by the board's draconian enforcement, and a palpable sense of rebellion was spreading through the community. Inside the HOA board's offices, tension simmered. Emergency meetings were convened, and behind closed doors, board members argued heatedly over the legitimacy of the fine. Some, long loyal to the strict rules, argued that every resident must adhere to the standards or risk diluting the community's image. Others, however, began to see the cracks in the system, acknowledging that my yard, with its organic charm and individuality, was a symbol of the very values that many in Crescent Park Estates secretly admired. Leaked minutes from these meetings revealed dissenting voices that questioned whether punishing artistic expression was worth the cost of community morale. Karen Miller, ever the enforcer, tried to spin the narrative. In a series of hastily recorded videos, she maintained that my unauthorized yard modifications were a threat to property values and that the fine was necessary to preserve order. But every attempt to justify her actions was met with a tidal wave of evidence. My digital dossier, replete with high-resolution images of my vibrant garden, video footage of my organic farming practices, and heartfelt testimonials from neighbors, painted a starkly different picture, one of a homeowner dedicated to cultivating life, creativity, and freedom. Determined to make my case even louder, I organized a community rally at the local park. Flyers were distributed, social media posts went viral, and within days, a petition demanding the repeal of the fine and a re-examination of the HOA's enforcement policies garnered tens of thousands of signatures. "Our homes are our sanctuaries," one petition read, "and no one should be fined for celebrating the natural beauty of life." The movement was no longer just about my yard. It had become a symbol of the fight for individuality across Crescent Park Estates. As the final public hearing drew near, I continued to document every development. Live streams, video blogs, and detailed updates flooded online forums. Neighbors shared their own grievances, from fines for unconventional garden layouts to complaints about personalized home decorations. The collective outcry was overwhelming. Every shared post, every hashtag, and every supportive comment was a declaration that our community was ready to break free from the oppressive mold of uniformity. The tension reached a fever pitch when the HOA board announced that the final hearing would be open to the public, inviting every resident to voice their opinions. The announcement sent shockwaves through Crescent Park Estates. Residents, emboldened by the movement, prepared to attend in droves. Community centers and school auditoriums were abuzz with planning meetings, and local influencers began rallying support for the cause. It was clear that this wasn't just a battle over a fine. It was a war for the soul of the community. I felt the weight of history on my shoulders. Every day, as I walked through my yard, the beauty of my organic, free-form garden reminded me of everything I had fought for. And I knew that when I stood before the HOA board at the final hearing, I wouldn't be alone. The voices of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of residents would be with me, demanding that creativity, individuality, and the right to live without fear of arbitrary enforcement be upheld. With every minute that ticked by, the stakes grew higher. The digital evidence was irrefutable, and the movement for reform had become unstoppable. I knew that the final public hearing would be the climax of this long-festering conflict, a moment when the collective will of Crescent Park Estates would force the HOA board to either bend to the demands of its residents or risk losing its credibility forever. The decisive moment arrived on a crisp morning in a packed boardroom at the Crescent Park Estates Community Center. The room was filled with a diverse array of HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and a sea of determined residents, all gathered for the final public hearing that would decide the future of our community's enforcement policies. With calm determination and a quiet dignity, I stepped forward to address the assembly. After a thorough review of all digital evidence, including high-resolution images of my garden, time-stamped video footage, and the impassioned testimonies of my neighbors, we have reached an inescapable conclusion. I began, my voice steady and resolute. It is abundantly clear that the fines imposed by the HOA, which target my property for its unique beauty, are not grounded in any legitimate concern for community standards, but are driven by a rigid, outdated ideology that seeks to suppress individuality. I paused, letting my words sink in as the room fell silent. I continued, "Our community is built on the principle that every homeowner has the right to express themselves and to cultivate their property in a manner that reflects their personality and heritage. The fine levied against me for what I consider an expression of creative freedom is not only unjust, it is a violation of our fundamental rights as property owners." My gaze swept over the audience, catching nods of approval and determined faces. The tension in the room was palpable as I laid out the digital dossier, screenshots, video clips, and written testimonials that clearly demonstrated the beauty and legitimacy of my organic, unorthodox garden. "We demand that this fine be rescinded immediately," I declared. "And more importantly, we demand that the HOA board reevaluate its policies to ensure that no homeowner is ever punished for embracing their individuality." My words rang out with conviction, and a wave of applause erupted among the residents. At that moment, Councilwoman Linda Carter, a longtime advocate for residents' rights, rose to speak. "Today, we stand at a crossroads," she proclaimed. "Either we continue to live under the oppressive weight of conformity, or we embrace the diversity that makes our community vibrant. I, for one, will not stand for arbitrary fines that stifle creativity and punish innovation. Let this vote be a turning point, a declaration that our community values freedom and the right to live authentically." Her impassioned speech was met with thunderous applause, and the energy in the room soared. A senior officer from the local law enforcement then presented the final report, a meticulously compiled dossier that confirmed the legality of my property modifications and debunked every claim made by the HOA. The evidence was irrefutable. My garden was a legally operated space, and the fine was nothing more than an abuse of power. The Internal Affairs panel had unanimously endorsed disciplinary action against the board's overreach. Councilwoman Carter concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Crescent Park Estates, a community where every homeowner's rights are protected and where personal expression is celebrated. Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will no longer allow outdated, arbitrary rules to dictate our lives. Together, we stand for justice, accountability, and the inalienable right to live freely. Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our battle. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of our community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Crescent Park Estates. The days of petty fines and draconian rules were over, and a future built on respect for individual rights was finally within our grasp. In the weeks following the historic vote, Crescent Park Estates underwent a profound transformation. News of the rescinded fines and sweeping reforms implemented by the HOA board spread rapidly throughout local media and on social networks, sparking spirited debates about property rights, creative freedom, and the role of community governance. Editorials in the local newspaper, bearing headlines such as "A New Dawn for Crescent Park" and "Community United for Freedom," celebrated the decisive actions taken to protect every resident's right to live and express themselves freely. Hashtags like #PropertyRights, #NoMoreHOBullying, and #ArtIsFreedom trended widely, reinforcing our collective determination to stand against arbitrary rule enforcement. Town hall meetings and community forums saw record attendance as residents gathered to share their experiences and to envision a future where individuality and creativity were not just tolerated, but celebrated. Neighbors, who had long lived in fear of punitive fines and invasive inspections, now spoke proudly about their right to manage their own property in a way that reflected their unique identities. "Our land and our art are our legacies," one impassioned resident declared at a bustling meeting, his voice echoing across the crowded room. The atmosphere was one of hope and renewal, a promise that Crescent Park Estates would always defend the freedoms of its residents. Within the reformed HOA board and local public safety departments, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs focused on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary procedures were established to ensure that every complaint would be scrutinized fairly, and that no resident would ever again be subjected to arbitrary fines or undue interference. Our duty is to protect the rights and dignity of every member of our community, Lieutenant Reed affirmed in a follow-up press conference, reinforcing our renewed commitment to justice and integrity. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations mobilized further to empower residents. Workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns were organized to raise awareness about the importance of creative freedom and individual property rights. When we unite, our voices have the power to reshape our community, a local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring neighbors to stand together and demand a more inclusive governance model. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was both deeply personal and transformative. My decision to stand up against the HOA's unjust fines and to forcefully reclaim my property through bold, artistic expression had not only restored my rights, but had also ignited a movement that resonated far beyond my own yard. Neighbors who had once been silenced by fear now found their voices, sharing their own stories of resistance and celebrating the triumph of individual freedom over bureaucratic oppression. The digital evidence that exposed the absurdity of the fine became a rallying cry for every resident who believed that private property and creative expression were inalienable rights. Karen Miller, once the formidable enforcer of Crescent Park's draconian rules, was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that no one is above accountability when a community stands united for justice. Her influence waned as digital records of her past transgressions circulated widely, underscoring the necessity of reform and the dangers of unchecked authority. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Crescent Park Estates, residents, local officials, and community advocates gather beneath the warm glow of the setting sun. A large banner reading, "Unity, Freedom, and Creative Expression," was unfurled between towering oaks, and heartfelt speeches resonated with promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate our victory over arbitrary interference, a victory for every homeowner and every creative soul in our community, Councilwoman Carter proclaimed, her voice resolute and inspiring. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our collective commitment to protecting our freedoms and ensuring that no one can abuse public power again. As each new day dawned over Crescent Park Estates, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how the HOA president's petty yard fine against a Supreme Court judge was overturned, and how our community rallied to defend individuality and creative expression, became a rallying cry for every resident. Every sunrise now carried with it the promise that in Crescent Park Estates, truth, justice, and personal freedom would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Crescent Park Estates would forever be a place where creativity, integrity, and respect for individual expression shone as brightly as the morning light.